Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest version of our latest episode of the Power Briefing podcast. With me today is Melissa Orth of the Legacy Senior Communities. Welcome.
Thank you, Howard. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. Just so everybody knows, I'm Howard Cleaver. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of O3 Energy here in Dallas, Texas. We're both in Dallas, Texas. So let's just dive right in. Let's talk a little bit about, defining the mission of defining the mission-based senior living model. We talked a lot about that before you got on the podcast. It was really interesting what you were doing. And so, want to get into that and understand a little more about how that model works. So what does mission-based senior living mean to you?
Well, I can talk specifically as it relates to legacy senior communities, which I think is probably consistent with a lot of not-for-profit continuing care retirement communities. But we at the Legacy, we've been in business for over 70 years. We are a not-for-profit Jewish-sponsored organization. So we are one of the social agencies that are part of the social fabric that is the safety net for Jewish seniors and their families across the greater Dallas area. And of course, we serve seniors and their families of all faiths. We exist to provide care and services that allow seniors to age with dignity and safety and really in ways that they want to live out their post-retirement years in the way that they want to do so. And we do all of that under the auspice of one large organization that provides several agencies that serve seniors in a mission-based way.
Fantastic, fantastic. So why is it important for your communities to blend nonprofit values with strong business fundamentals?
It's a great question. As they say, no mission, no margin, or no margin, no mission, I should
Yeah.
say. We very much exist to serve seniors and their families relative to our mission. And a prime example would be we make decisions on a fairly regular basis that might not make sense financially, but make sense as it relates to our commitment to the senior community and specifically the Jewish community, that again, we be that safety net for Jewish seniors and their families. So it might be that there is someone that is wanting to come in. We had this example most recently and wanted a Medicaid bed in one of our healthcare centers. We really had spent all of our financial assistance or committed all of our financial assistance funding. And so we looked for a quality organization that we could recommend as an alternative, and we couldn't find one. And we decided in living our mission, we needed to bring this person in and care for them in the same way we would anyone who was on a full pay or anyone who was currently on our financial assistance. And that is really making decisions with a mission lens versus a pure financial lens. That said, we are a large, complex business, and so we have to pay attention to that financial sustainability and make sure that we've got enough revenues, whether that comes from earned revenues from business and complemented by fundraising to cover our costs and capital expenditures of running our communities.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, if you don't have money, you can't execute the mission. So yeah, it makes complete
Exactly.
sense. Can you share what sets your campuses apart in the Dallas area?
Absolutely. So, as I said, we've been around for over 70 years. We have a really strong reputation, not only locally, but nationally in senior living. We were one of the first senior living facilities back when senior living was primarily a large skilled nursing facility. We were focused, highlighted on 60 Minutes in the 60s for our commitment to quality and innovation. And then again in the 1990s on 2020. We go way back in understanding the importance of offering quality and excellence in service and care across whatever service lines that we offer. And of course, that has grown over time. Now we have two campuses, one in the heart of Dallas, one up in Plano, as well as a home and community-based services company that provides home health, personal assistance services, and hospice services. And it's important that we provide a full continuum, depending on what the needs are, to the services, seniors and the families that we serve. And we do so in a way that is in beautiful buildings, but really the heart of our community is our team members, the people that serve and care for our seniors and the families, and then the seniors and the families that we serve.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, you do have beautiful buildings. I've seen them. They're
Thank you.
really nice. Yeah. How do you maintain a sense of community and purpose across such diverse residents, services and residents?
Well, since we are sponsored by the Jewish community here in Dallas, we have probably more of a natural built-in commitment to community than many might. And again, given that we've gone back, over 7 decades, there are a lot of people that are currently on our board or are our own residents that remember their family members being in our original Golden Acres retirement community back again in the 60s and 70s. So we naturally have this kind of built-in sense of community. But at the same time, we make sure that people that didn't grow up in Dallas or are not members of the Jewish community, in fact, my parents they moved from Omaha, Nebraska, and were one of the first people to move into our new Midtown Park community in February of 2021. And everyone that I talk to, when I say, how are we working with your transition? How are we welcoming you and making you feel? We get the most positive, grateful responses to that. And that's important to us because it's a big change when you decide to move out of your home into a communal living, even if you're really excited about that change. It's very different than living in your home. And so we're very purposeful in making sure that from the minute people decide to make the move to when they move in to a couple months in, that they are feeling good about that decision and they feel a part of our community, whether they knew people moving in or not.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Yeah, personally, I've had that experience too with my own folks moving into a community as well. And some of the things you highlighted there, I definitely hit home. So that's great. Let's talk a little bit about the operational challenges and innovations that are going on in your space and in your organization specifically. What operational challenges have been most significant in the last few years?
Well, the obvious is kind of the post-pandemic hangover that we're all experiencing. And thankfully, over the last few years, that has gotten better. Coming out of the pandemic, there was a tremendous labor shortage. Some of that was just the burnout that all healthcare agencies were feeling. Some of that was tied to some of the immigration reform, and so many of our caregivers are immigrants to the United States. And so we felt in a big way that shortage of labor, which meant that our own staff were working a lot of overtime. We had to rely on agency staff, which we don't love to do for a variety of reasons. One, it's financially much more costly when you're paying a third party, but also when you're bringing in people to work in an industry like ours with a population like ours, and they haven't gone to your orientation or understand what it is to do things the legacy way. They're good, dedicated people, but it's not the same as taking time to hire and train and onboard our own staff. So that's probably been the largest challenge, and it's had an impact both on operations as well as financial. I would say that we are in the best position as, I think, a community as well as an industry in that regard over the last few years, and we're hopeful that that trend will continue. We're really working hard to show people coming out of high school or coming out of college that the senior living and senior care industry is one that's growing and really robust and can be incredibly rewarding.
Yeah.
We haven't historically been an industry that a lot of people in the healthcare industry in particular think about when they think about a career. And once they come and work with the people that we're serving and in our communities, they oftentimes get very bit by the bug and are very committed to it. But we need more people thinking of us as they, jump into their careers to make sure that we're going to have enough people. The demographics for seniors are exploding. The demographics for the next generation is the opposite. And so there's real concerns about a lack of caregivers and staff just from a demographic perspective as well.
Yeah, you've got that inverted pyramid when it looks at you look at the population demographics. It's a real challenge for every industry, and it's a common theme that I hear from everyone we talk to is, where are we going to find the quality people to take care of things?
Well, and that ties in, Howard, to your next question about innovation, right? So there's a lot of talk, just like there is in many industries, about how do you leverage artificial intelligence and technology. And, there are things popping up every day to catch our attention, whether that is remote monitoring for falls, for changes in healthcare status, to actual robots in the dining room or robots, providing care. And of course, given the population that we serve and how important relationships are, to seniors and their families, we really need to balance that. And part of the challenge is making sure that we're embracing that new technology as it comes, but doing it in a very thoughtful and purposeful way. One way that we recently did that is we partnered with an organization that created these smart toilets called Trulu, and
True Lou, that's a great name. Yeah.
it catches through the same kind of radar that's used in the airline industry where there is blood or abnormalities in toiletring, and that allows us to more quickly potentially diagnose. We don't use it as a diagnostic feature itself, but it informs our clinical staff to then run tests to confirm whether there's a UTI or something else going on. And as you may know, UTIs in seniors can become pretty serious really quickly and have all sorts of ramifications. So that's just one example. There are plenty of them. And as an industry, we want to embrace that, but also want to do so in a very, again, thoughtful and purposeful way.
That's fantastic. One of the thoughts I've had around, the whole labor shortage and stuff, particularly in your field with senior care, is it'll be interesting to see, 20 years from now, as the next generation ages into your facilities, they'll probably be much more familiar and comfortable with robots and things like that. So, I'm imagining this kind of natural transition that it'd be hard for the baby boomer generation to have robots, serving them and stuff. But I think as you get into the X and the millennial generations and people are more comfortable with technology, that maybe there's sort of a natural transition into it without too much disruption. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, it's really,
Absolutely. And that's
yeah,
happening just with technology in general right
yeah,
now. I
that's
mean,
right.
we have a online portal where people can sign up for classes. That's where the calendar is. It makes dinner reservations, and the people coming into our community now, embrace that in general in a way that maybe people who have been with us for 15 plus years feel a little less comfortable. So I think
Yeah,
even just in leveraging technology, much less AI and robots, we're seeing a real shift in the demographic that we're serving. But you're right. I think, the statistics say over 10,000 people turn 65 a day, and that the number
amazing.
of people over 85 are going to, double over the next 2 decades. And those are the people that, people are living longer for sure. They're living healthier lives. They want more out of this post-retirement phase. They want more choice. So the industry is really looking to respond to that, to make sure that we've got a variety of ways that we can help serve, that population. But by the same token, the sad statistic is only 10% of those seniors can really afford the care or service they
Yeah,
need, whether that's in a community like ours or another community or even in their home. So that's
yeah,
really the crisis that we as a country face, in addition to what you mentioned with the declining demographics for the caregivers. That
yeah,
combination is kind of a scary one if we don't solve for that.
yeah.
Demographics for need are in our favor, but how we respond to that, I think, is still to be written.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Let's get a little bit more specific around some of the business, the operational challenges you've had. When we talked last time, you were talking about your dining program and outsourcing that. Can you talk about the decision around that and what were sort of the drivers there?
Absolutely. So we opened Willow Bend, which is our Plano campus up in Ine, and for a long time we had a very high-end, excellent dining program. And so we know that it can be done, on your own, if you will. But what we found is that we were really tied to who was the food and beverage director and the executive chef in those seats. And when we would experience turnover, then we would experience a huge transition and decline in that service, and then it was
Yeah,
incumbent on who we could bring in. So we are very committed to high-end dining. It's part of the core of who we are. Seniors like good food. Part of the reason they move into communities like ours, they don't want to have to cook every day,
yeah,
to be able to be treated like they're in a restaurant setting. But what's challenging is, few of us eat at the same restaurant every day. And so
yeah,
keeping both the quality up, but also the variety, and being committed to healthy from scratch cooking using local and quality ingredients is really what we're committed to. And we just found that partnering with a business that is their core competency, that's what they
Yeah.
do best and they do day in and day out, could be a real win-win for us. And so really the staff that are serving both front of house and back of house are seniors and their family. We treat them as if they are legacy senior community team members. They are here full-time or for their full-time commitment, and they have the same. I think that people that come to work with us come because they really enjoy the environment. They enjoy getting to know the seniors and their families. When I talk with people in our dining program, they say that's what really attracts them to senior living as opposed to the restaurant world. And, it really, to our residents, we're hopeful that it's still the legacy dining program, kind of powered by, if you will, this third-party business partner who is a real expert in food service and gets better economies of scale on the food that they purchase.
Yeah.
A little more tied in because they can be to how we source talent when we need it, who can provide when we do lose someone, who can provide someone to fill in until we can replace that person. So done right, we think we can leverage really the best of both worlds and keep up our commitment to an excellent dining program.
Fantastic. Let's switch gears a little bit. We'll get into a little bit of my world. We'll talk a little bit about energy efficiency and sustainability in senior living. How are you thinking about those topics in your operations today?
Well, the most recent and kind of obvious one is we did do a conversion of our campus that we built in 0809 to LED lighting. And that's been, both enhanced the lighting as well as been much more efficient from an electrical perspective. Of course, we built our recent community with all of that in place from the beginning, which was nice.
Yeah.
We've explored a little bit what solar panels might do. We haven't acted on that yet. We're trying to do our best to conserve electricity where we can. And trust me, there are plenty of residents that have input about how we might do that.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Turning off the security lighting, and we say, no, we can't do that. Both in terms of our carbon footprint and what's best for the environment, as well as how do we best control a pretty big line item in our budget, we're looking at all ways to try to be more efficient and effective in that regard.
Okay. Do you have an overall strategy in place, or is it kind of as you operate, you kind of come across things that might make sense? What's your approach when it comes to that?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say we have a defined strategy. We are in a, multi-year agreement, which we, looked at whether or not it made sense to join a co-op or to enhance that on our own. We have a very talented director of facilities who, that's on his radar in a way to keep looking, and that when we do our CapEx budgeting, that's a factor, but I wouldn't say that we have a formal energy strategy at this point.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair enough. You're not alone. Don't feel bad about that one. What opportunities do you see to integrate sustainability into future community designs or renovations? You talked about, I guess, some of your newer facilities. You've already incorporated a lot of that. So I guess that's kind of an ongoing thing for you.
It is. Right now, we do not have plans right now in the works for another campus or community. I think when and if the time comes to do that, we're just getting ready to kick off a strategic planning initiative this fall that will plan for the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. But it absolutely is something on the radar as we look for renovations and new campuses. Again, it's just the important thing to do for the environment, but as well as for the effectiveness from a financial perspective.
Yeah, definitely. How are residents or their families influencing the conversation around sustainability in your organization? You said you've got a lot of opinions. How is that working out? And what's the sort of channel they use, and how does that feedback get compiled, and what's the action taken, that sort of thing?
Yeah, great question. So we have resident advisory councils at each of our campuses, and those are made up of residents, and then there are committees to those councils, and so they provide a formal channel of input to management. I mean, obviously, any resident can come talk to anybody in management and, provide their thoughts and feedback, and they do.
Yeah.
But that is kind of a more formal structure. I know here at Midtown Park, we had a couple residents who felt very passionately about recycling. And so we've tried to put a formal recycling program in place. And like anything and anytime, any organization I've been with, when we've tried to do that, we've got some wins, but we still have some work to do. And also understanding, what really happens when we provide those recycled materials, to the appropriate places in the city. So I think the focus so far has been a lot on that. We've done a lot of that initiative in our kitchen, recycling some of the grease and oils, and looked at doing some composting. And then also with regards to, like I said, some feedback about lights staying on and how, is there ways to manage our electricity better? Are there ways to manage how we're watering and when we're watering? So there are, our residents have a variety of professional backgrounds. And
Yeah.
so, we have people that have worked in those industries, and so therefore provide some helpful insights that, we may or may not be seeing. And like anything, we just take that input, we marry that against what is realistic or what we're doing from an operations standpoint, and try to leverage some of that expertise when we can.
Yeah, you got a lot of expertise, retired expertise out there, and they've got a lot of time on their hands too. So there's
Yes.
a lot of a lot of things going on. Do you see sustainability initiatives as a differentiator for attracting the next generation of residents?
I do, actually. I think that with each generation, there's more understanding and focus on average. Just, there's more information out there, what's happening to our environment from
Yeah.
a sustainability perspective. It's becoming more real, right? We're all experiencing some of the results of that. So I think in general, with each generation, there's going to be more awareness and more focus. And quite frankly, that's what's probably going to need to happen to make sure that people invest the time and the resources into building more sustainable facilities and more sustainable communities.
What barriers, whether they be financial, cultural, regulatory, make it harder to adopt sustainable practices? Have you run into any barriers there?
Well, I mean, we do have several barriers. I'm not sure that they're specifically barriers to sustainability, but we are a very highly regulated industry.
Yes.
We're one of the most regulated industries across the nation, and understandably, in some regards, given the people that we serve. But there are very specific regulations as it relates to from staffing to programming to meals to the facilities that we build. And so we first and foremost have to make sure that we're complying with those. You mentioned early on just the inflation and the labor shortage.
Yeah.
Our margins have really shrunk as an industry since the pandemic for all of those reasons, right? Inflation
Yeah.
in general, labor pool going up, and labor for most organizations like ours, is roughly 2/3, 65% of our total expenses are what we pay our people and compensation and benefits. So when the labor markets go up and benefits go up, that's a significant increase in our cost. And at the same time, in our healthcare centers, we have a little less control over the revenue there. So what we're receiving from Medicare or Medicaid or managed care and insurance, we don't control that largely. We can do things to try to maximize that based on the care we're giving and how we, our admission processes. But I would say across the industry, our margins have declined over the last several years. So when your margins decline, it does take away some of that flexibility to invest in some of those things that you would maybe want to do from, an innovative or sustainability perspective. But that said, this industry is changing by the day almost. Yeah. It's not an alternative to kind of bury your head and just not invest. You have to just find ways to free up the right kind of resources to make sure that you're keeping pace with what the needs are and the changes are in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that was a great answer. Let's talk a little bit about leadership and lessons you've learned along the way. Yeah, always a fun topic, right? You stepped into this role right before the pandemic. Congratulations. I know that was
Thank you.
quite a time to step in. What did that teach you about leadership under pressure?
So much. In some respects, that feels like it was yesterday. In some respects, it feels like it was time ago,
I
right?
know
And
it does. Yeah.
I shared with you, this was my first stint in senior living. So I started almost 8 years ago, and yes, we were building this new, beautiful community. Thankfully, we locked into a guaranteed maximum price in our financing. And so all of the things that happened to people that had not done that during the pandemic, our timing, we were fortunate, hit that at the right time. But of course, none of us were prepared or immune from what would happen at the beginning of the pandemic, and especially given the population that we serve. And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger if you're, a strong team and community. And I really felt fortunate that this really brought the legacy and the Jewish community together to respond to, so much uncertainty. And I remember thinking numerous times that this would be so much harder if everybody was questioning or criticizing every decision that we made. And granted, there were some that we did not want to have to make. When we had to
Yeah.
close the community and say, I'm sorry, you can't come see your loved ones, that was a very difficult decision to make. Pretty proactive and did that before oftentimes we were mandated to. But honestly, to a person, and whether that was our board leadership or our seniors or our family members, the response as opposed to, questioning why we were making those tough decisions was more in general gratefulness of keeping people
Yeah.
safe as we could. And I think for me and for the leadership team, I think what we realized is at times like that, you can't be certain about the decisions you make. There's no playbook. So you have to just give it as much thought and planning and be as proactive as you can, and then not hesitate and just act on that and then pivot as you needed to. And I think a lot of organizations, across the nation, but especially people in the healthcare industry, that was critically important, was to just trust the people around you to make the decisions that were best for the people that you were serving. I remember calling the COVID response team for one of the key hospital systems here in Dallas because we had a question, and that physician for this, nationally recognized hospital was flipping through a book. I could hear saying, let's see what the CDC says. And I'm like, oh, I know what the CDC says,
Yeah.
but we're looking. And that really dawned on me that, like, wow, none of us really know,
No.
right? We're all kind of figuring it out together. So I think we all, learned lessons from that hopefully we'll take into, hopefully not a crisis quite at that level, but, with other future unexpected, hopefully we're all stronger for it.
Yeah, that's great. What advice would you give to someone who's taking an executive role in a mission-driven organization?
Well, first and foremost, you have to be really passionate about that mission, right?
Yeah, makes
Because
sense.
it really guides and drives every decision. Again, that doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to the financial and operational needs or challenges that whatever that business has, because without that, you won't be able to fulfill that mission. It's really important that you are passionate about it, that you understand it, that everybody at the organization is aligned on what that mission is, and that you utilize that in making your both strategic, longer term decisions, but as well as your day-to-day decisions.
Okay. How do you stay grounded and focused with so many competing demands? Throwing a curveball there.
Yeah, no, I think everybody does that a little differently. For me, it's part of the challenge and therefore what makes this industry exciting and feel like an area for great growth. You do need to keep a lot of things in the air, right? You need to think about what the regulations say so that you're compliant with that. You need to run a very tight, focused operational. You also need to really have your eye focused on the financial realities. And then first and foremost, you need to keep in the forefront, the people that you're serving.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're a very emotional business as well. So whether it's seniors or their families, you need to be able to hear from the people that we're serving and hear what we're doing well or what we can do better, either as an organization or as an industry, and just lead with compassion.
Yeah.
Compassionate care is one of our core values, and it's there for a reason because these are, are wonderful times, but they can be really tough times for seniors and their families as well. And you
Yeah,
need to be able to have the empathy and meet people where they are with that.
that's great. What's one big operational issue you could solve overnight if you could?
That I would solve overnight if I
Yeah,
could.
if you could just wave a wand, what would it be?
I think it would probably be the staffing
Yeah,
crisis. If we,
I
if we
figured
could
that
wave
much. Yeah,
a wand and have really quality team members who are passionate about what we do and good at their jobs and that want to stay with us for years and years and years,
yeah,
and that we could pay them honestly what they deserve, because we ask a lot of our team members, and we were able to increase our hourly rates quite a bit during the pandemic. We needed to. We had plans
yeah,
to do it, but kind of forced our hand to do it more quickly. And that's another thing is, as a country, we need to pay, just like we need to pay teachers better, we need to pay our caregivers and, our clinical staff, because what we ask them to do is hard. It's hard
yeah,
work. It's rewarding work and it's meaningful work, but it's also hard.
yeah,
My other one would be that we could pay people what they're worth.
yeah. That's great. Well, let's look ahead a little bit about where the industry is going. How do you see the senior living sector evolving over the next decade?
So, again, I think that there's going to be numerous changes. I think the way that we serve seniors and their families are going to expand and change. I think there's going to be a huge growth in community-based programming, and that's probably where, when we go through our strategic plan, we'll be heavily focused on additional community-based programs so we can reach more seniors and their families and respond to their desire for choice, or maybe their need for choice, based on what they're able to afford. So whether that is a licensed day programming, we've talked about a senior resource and education center, because oftentimes it's really difficult to understand what options are out there, what questions to ask.
Yeah,
Oftentimes it's a catalyst moment that puts families in that moment, whether someone's gotten a diagnosis or fallen, or maybe someone passed away and they were the caregiver for their spouse. And so we want to be there for people in those moments, but we also want to help seniors and their families plan so they feel a little more prepared when some of those things happen, about what their options are. We are going to have to rely on artificial intelligence and technology to become more efficient and effective, and we will, and in a way that's going to balance that, shrinking workforce. You mentioned it earlier. I mean, our industry is changing a ton, and it
yeah,
has over in the almost 10 years since I've been involved in the industry, but I think that is exponentially growing and changing more quickly as the demographics grow for our seniors. So there's going to be a lot of changes, but I think the industry is preparing themselves for that. And I think we're trying to be as fluid and flexible as we can to respond to what those needs are, so that all seniors and their family members can get the help and the care and the service that they need.
fantastic. Yeah. Do you think energy independence or broader sustainability initiatives will become standard across the industry?
I hope so. I think that, again, I think they need to be more standard across all industries. It's a key priority, or should be a key priority in crisis for our country. And so, we have large communal living campuses that really need to embrace that, both again in terms of it being the right thing to do, but also, if we've got tight margins and we're looking to maximize the monies that we do have going into programming and care for our seniors, being as efficient as we can on the energy and sustainability side is important to do.
Yeah, the cost of energy is only going up. It's just, yeah, it's relentless. What gives you the most optimism about the future of mission-based care?
I think that the demand is going to be there more than ever. I think that people, especially in this industry, realize the importance of compassion and empathy and commitment to the individual and those families. And not saying that for-profits don't have that same goal, but one thing that is unique about mission-based organizations is, again, decisions are first and foremost made in line with the mission. Any funds that we're able to generate over our expenses stays within the organization and gets invested back into the
Yeah,
families that we serve. There will just always be a need for mission-based organizations to give back to whatever constituency that that.
fantastic. Well, that's all the sort of regular questions I had for you. One other question I'd like to ask is there something that we should be talking about that we're not? on this podcast? Is there something that topic that you'd like to highlight before we conclude?
Well, I think the key things, I think we've touched on them, but what kind of keeps me up at night as an industry is, just the huge, huge increase in demand and how difficult it is to keep it accessible and affordable.
Yeah.
And, there really are no true generous long-term care plans any longer. And in fact, a continuing care retirement community like we have, both at Midtown Park and Willow Bend, provides kind of a form of that, in that
Yeah.
if you invest into the community, then it's like a long-term care insurance policy where you get a reduction as you move through the continuum. And so that's helpful for the
Mm,
people that are able to live here. But I do think that crisis is, how are we going to allow, or how are we as a country going to help ensure that all of these people aging into their 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s, we have multiple people on both campuses that are over 100
wow.
and, could probably walk circles around me around this campus, right? And that's what we want. We
Yeah.
want, the number of residents that have said to me that this community has added years to their life, right? That is
That's
just music to
fantastic.
our ears. That's what
Yeah.
we want, and it's both, the physical programs and all the things, and it's the social emotional support. Loneliness is a huge deterrent to a long and healthy lifestyle. But the longer we keep people alive, the more care they're going to need. And as a community, we need to be sure that people can afford that care.
Yeah. Well,
So
fantastic. Yeah. Well, that's a great note to end on. So thanks again. We were with Melissa Orth of the Legacy Senior Communities. Thank you very much for taking the time today to be on our podcast. And with that, we'll conclude. Thanks again.
thank you.